In the dazzling ballroom of the Elysium Club, the wealthy Harrington family mocked a humble waitress, believing she was powerless beneath their diamonds and pride. But humiliation turned into defiance. With trembling hands, she seized the microphone, and a haunting song filled the air, each note exposing a hidden past the Harringtons had buried for decades. Their empire of lies began to crack in front of the city's elite. What secret did her voice unleash that left the mighty Harringtons in ruins? The Elysium Club did not simply host parties. It curated them like rare art, polishing every surface until it gleamed in every guest until they believed they belonged among the stars. Crystal chandeliers hovered like frozen constellations. A string quartet painted the air with velvet. Beyond the panoramic windows, the city glittered as if it had dressed to impress the people gazing down on it. Clara Wells moved through that splendor like a swift shadow of light. The tray balanced on her forearm carried 4 fluted glasses breathing chill mist. She had learned to float rather than walk, to anticipate a hand before it lifted, to read a table's mood by the angle of a chin. Her uniform was spotless. Her smile was measured. Every tip mattered. Every second mattered more. In a quiet facility across town, her mother waited for the next payment that kept the machines gentle and the nurses kind. At the center of the ballroom stood the reason the air seemed to tilt toward one table. The Harringtons. Edward Harrington wore power the way athletes wore muscle. Effortless. Solid. His jaw was cut hard enough to serve as a warning. Beside him sat Victoria, pale and immaculate, her diamonds arranged like a verdict. Damien lounged with a slouch designed to look careless and calculated to offend, one ankle crossed over a knee, his cufflinks catching the chandelier light whenever he shifted. Around them, a radius of admiration and fear widened and contracted with each laugh, each glance, each signal. The evening's excuse was charity. A gala to fund the Harrington Foundation's New Arts Initiative. The real occasion was a showcase. Edward had invited investors who valued proximity more than numbers on a page. Reporters drifted like hawks pretending to be doves. Photographers mapped the hierarchy with their lenses. No one needed the seating chart to know who mattered. It was written in posture and the hush that followed certain footsteps. Clara reached their table with the grace of practiced invisibility. Her chest rose once, steady. She began to pour. The champagne sang against the crystal and steadied her hands. Edward did not look at her. He was speaking to a shipping magnate about corridors and tariffs. Victoria did not look at her. She was examining her reflection in a knife's polished spine. Damien watched. His eyes were the color of money that had been handled too long. "You are late," Victoria said. The phrase slid from her tongue like a knife from a silk sheath. "We have been waiting while you admired the ceiling." "My apologies, ma'am," Clara said. Her voice carried the precise weight of deference required to pass safely through the Harrington climate. Damien smiled without warmth. "Careful with the pour. Father hates a tablecloth that looks like second-hand sorrow." He leaned back, letting one chair leg skate over the floor until it blocked Clara's path. It was a small thing. A boy's prank in a man's suit. It was enough. Clara adjusted. The tray dipped, then steadied. Glasses chimed once in soft alarm and fell silent. She stepped over the trap with a dancer's economy. The thread of humiliation tugged and then loosened. "Not tonight," she thought. "Not for you." "Mr. Harrington, may I refresh your glass?" she asked. Edward raised his eyes for the first time. They were cool, assessing, as if he were appraising the efficiency of a new elevator. He nodded. The nod was permission, not regard. From somewhere near the bandstand, a laugh cracked too loud. The quartet faltered, recovered, and continued with the stoicism of professionals paid to outlast embarrassment. The room returned to its rhythm. Clara poured for Edward, then for Victoria, then reached Damien. He lifted his flute an inch, then lowered it sharply as she tilted the bottle. The rim kissed the glass stem. A clear note rang and stopped. Clara caught the slip, corrected, and finished the pour without a spill. Damien widened his smile as if disappointed by the lack of spectacle. "Pity," he said. "Accidents can be so educational." Clara placed the bottle on the side stand. "Thank you, sir." She pivoted to leave. Damien's voice followed her like a hand on the back of her neck. "Tell me," he said, loud enough for the nearby tables to absorb. "When you dream, do you see a different uniform, or only a larger tip jar?" A few mouths curved. Not laughter. Anticipation. The ballroom loved a scene as long as someone else paid for it. Victoria's lashes fluttered with practiced boredom. Edward returned to his conversation, but the angle of his head sharpened, as if he were listening to two frequencies at once. Clara felt the words land against the barrier she had built over years of small cruelties. She had learned to let insults pass through like smoke. Tonight the smoke burned. Not from the boy's smirk. From something older under the chandeliers and the soft music. The faint tattoo of fingers against linen. Edward's hand. A patient, unconscious rhythm. It was not business. It was a guitarist's ghost. The pattern pricked a memory like a thorn. A voice from a warm kitchen. Her mother humming, then saying the title as if it kept her safe. The Willow's Lament. The words brushed the inside of Clara's throat. They did not leave. Not yet. She bowed her head the exact degree of submission required. "Enjoy your evening, sir." Then she moved away, the tray empty, the air strange in her lungs. Near the service doors she paused beside a mirrored column and saw herself framed by wealth that would never notice her reflection. In the glass behind her, the Harrington table gleamed like a crown. Edward's fingers tapped. A slow, intricate cadence. The city lights winked their silent encouragement. Clara swallowed the heat in her chest. She looked at the stage where a single microphone stood waiting between songs like a silver road sign pointing at a choice. She steadied her breath. Somewhere far from chandeliers, a woman who had taught her to bend without breaking slept beneath a soft blanket and a beeping blue light. Clara turned back to the room and kept walking, the decision forming in the soundless space between one heartbeat and the next. The next round of champagne had barely been poured before the Harrington table grew restless again. Their conversations never wandered far from dominance. For Edward, it was numbers and leverage. For Victoria, it was reputation and control. For Damien, it was spectacle, preferably at someone else's expense. The Harrington heir leaned back, swirling his glass with lazy disdain. He whispered something to Isabella Moreau, his fiancée, who sat beside him in a pale blue gown that shimmered like a captive sky. Isabella forced a brittle smile and nodded, but her eyes betrayed unease. She had grown up in comfort, but not in excess. The Harrington world was different. It was merciless. Damien lifted his voice so the nearby guests could hear. "My mother says waitresses like her have no ambition." He gestured toward Clara, who had just returned with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. "I disagree. Surely they dream. A bigger uniform, a heavier tray, perhaps a manager's badge one day." A low ripple of laughter spread. Clara halted by their table, the tray steady though her pulse quickened. She had been here before, in different rooms, with different faces, each cruelty rehearsed as if the rich studied the same script. Her mask of composure held. Her voice, soft but unshaken, asked, "Would anyone like to try the smoked salmon tartlets?" Damien ignored the food. "Tell us," he said. "What do you dream about at night?" He tilted his head, waiting. His eyes gleamed with the promise of more mockery. Edward remained silent, but his gaze lifted toward his son. Not approval, not disapproval. Observation. Victoria's lips curved slightly, a faint smirk of indulgence. Isabella lowered her gaze, her hands clenching around her clutch until the knuckles whitened. Clara inhaled slowly. The words balanced on her tongue were bitter. To tell him nothing. To retreat. To survive the night. But survival felt like a chain. She looked past Damien to Edward. His fingers drummed again, subtle, deliberate, the rhythm unmistakable. Her throat tightened with recognition. That same rhythm had once lulled her mother to sleep. The Willow's Lament. A song written by a man named Rick. A man Clara had never met, but whose ghost lived inside her locket. The air thickened. She heard her mother's whisper in memory. He said I was his willow. Graceful. Bending. But never breaking. She had believed it once. Clara had believed it too, until life demanded silence instead of music. Tonight silence was no longer enough. Her reply left her lips clear and measured. I dream of a time when worth is not measured by the price of a suit. I dream of stages, of voices rising above cruelty, of songs that tell the truth. The laughter at the table faltered. A hush pressed in. Damien's smirk slipped. Insolent little, he muttered, his voice sharp. Victoria's eyes hardened into ice. Edward's gaze fixed fully on Clara now, no longer indifferent, no longer detached. Something flickered there. Recognition. Memory. Or guilt. You sing, then, Victoria said, her tone dripping with contempt. Another clumsy pursuit. Show us, if you dare. The challenge rang louder than the quartet's polished notes. Heads turned. Guests leaned in, curious, hungry for scandal. A waitress defying the Harringtons. Such things did not happen at the Elysium Club. Clara's chest rose. She glanced once at Mr. Davies, the weary club manager watching from the edge of the room. His brows knit in silent warning. But her decision had already crystallized. Dignity mattered more than consequence. I can carry a tune, she answered, her voice steady as stone. She set the tray aside, straightened her uniform, and began to walk. Not toward the bar, not toward the safety of the service corridor. Toward the stage. A murmur rippled through the ballroom. Some guests chuckled, expecting a farce. Others leaned forward, intrigued. Damien laughed too loudly, theatrically, trying to recapture control. What is this? A poetry recital about spilled champagne. His voice cracked, betraying unease. Edward said nothing. He only watched, his jaw tight, his eyes following Clara as she crossed the room. The drumming of his fingers ceased. The stage lights gleamed on polished wood. The microphone waited, gleaming silver beneath the chandeliers. It looked less like a tool and more like a weapon. The quartet had ended their set, their instruments resting in velvet cases. All sound dimmed until the room was a cocoon of expectation. Clara mounted the small steps. Each footfall rang louder in her chest than in her ears. She gripped the microphone. The cool metal steadied her, anchored her. The silence that followed was not absence. It was a held breath, a fuse burning toward revelation. She closed her eyes, saw her mother's face, heard her voice. The willow bends, my love, but it does not break. When she opened her eyes, she no longer saw guests or chandeliers. She saw only Edward Harrington. The man her mother had once loved. The man who had walked away. Clara raised the microphone. The first note formed in her chest, powerful, unyielding, impossible to stop. And then she sang. The first note poured from Clara's lips like light spilling into a darkened room. Pure, unwavering, and sharp enough to cut through every murmur in the hall. It was not timid. It was not hesitant. It was the sound of years held back, years of silence now released with the force of survival. The chandeliers seemed to vibrate with the resonance. Glasses trembled on polished tables. Conversations died mid-sentence. The melody carried sorrow and longing, yet it rose with dignity. It was the Willow's Lament, the very song her mother had once whispered about. Each note was a tether reaching into the past, binding Clara's voice to the memory of Maria Wells and to the man she had loved and lost. Guests shifted in their seats. They had come expecting speeches of business and displays of wealth. Instead, they sat trapped beneath the weight of music too raw, too honest, to ignore. A billionaire's gala had turned into a cathedral, and Clara's voice was the sermon. Damien's smirk collapsed. The laughter he had prepared stuck in his throat, choking him with disbelief. He glanced at his parents for cues. Victoria's lips were pressed into a hard line, her diamonds flashing like cold fire. Her fury was palpable, but her poise demanded she remain still. Edward Harrington, however, did not move at all. His broad shoulders stiffened. His fingers twitched against the tablecloth, as though trying to remember the shape of a guitar fretboard. He knew this song. The memories came unbidden. A cramped apartment. Rain on the window. A young woman with hair as dark as midnight, eyes full of stubborn belief. Her name had been Maria. She had called him Rick, not Edward. He had written this song for her on a Tuesday that smelled of coffee and wet pavement. He had promised her forever. Then he had traded forever for fortune. Clara's voice soared higher. The willow bends beneath the storm. A promise whispered to keep me warm. You said our love was river strong. But rivers wander, and you are gone. Every lyric struck Edward like a hammer. His wine glass slipped from his trembling hand, toppling silently into the thick carpet. A spreading stain of red crept across the linen like spilled blood. Victoria turned sharply, panic flashing across her features. Edward's mask, the one he had worn for decades, was cracking. Around them, the guests watched with rapt attention. Some gasped, others whispered. None dared interrupt. Even the Lees, the honored foreign investors, sat frozen, their eyes narrowing as they studied the patriarch unraveling before them. Clara poured her anguish into the song, each syllable a blade honed by years of injustice. Her voice trembled with emotion, yet never faltered. The notes wrapped around the marble pillars and velvet drapes, defying the room's wealth and crushing arrogance. She sang of betrayal. She sang of loss. She sang of truth long buried beneath steel and gold. And though no name had yet been spoken, the story was unmistakable. The man who had abandoned Maria Wells had written this song. And that man now sat at the center of the Harrington empire. Isabella Moreau's tears fell freely, streaking her flawless makeup. She clutched her engagement ring as if it were a chain around her finger. She looked at Damien, who sat pale, stricken, and suddenly small in the shadow of his father's shame. The song was hers, too. A story of captivity and exchange, of love traded for status. The final verse rose like thunder. Clara's chest heaved with the effort, but she did not break. And oh, the willow weeps for you. Its branches cry for what was true. You traded songs for gold and steel. And left a wound that will not heal. When the last word faded, silence reigned. It was not the polite pause before applause. It was the silence of revelation, heavy and absolute. 200 guests held their breath, unwilling to break the moment. Clara lowered the microphone, her eyes locked on Edward. He looked back at her, gray-faced, hollow, as though he were staring at a ghost. His lips parted. A whisper escaped, fragile and raw. Maria. It was a confession heard by those closest to him, but the room did not need the word. They had already understood. The truth hung in the air, undeniable. The Harrington dynasty, built on marble and ruthlessness, had just cracked beneath the weight of a song. Clara gripped the microphone again. Her voice, steady and unflinching, filled the room. This song was written for my mother, Maria Wells, by a man she called Rick. A struggling musician who vanished when ambition called. Gasps erupted. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Clara held the silence a moment longer, then delivered the final blow. But you all know him by another name. Edward Harrington. Chaos ignited. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Guests rose to their feet. And at the center of it all, the Harrington empire began to crumble under the truth, while a waitress on stage stood tall, her voice still echoing in every corner of the hall. The ballroom at the Elysium Club exploded into pandemonium. Guests gasped, whispered, and fumbled for their phones, recording the moment they knew would ripple through every news outlet by morning. The air, once perfumed with luxury, now reeked of scandal. The Harrington name, Edward's empire of wealth and power, had just been split open with a single revelation. Victoria Harrington lurched to her feet, her diamonds rattling as her hands trembled with rage. Her voice, sharp enough to slice glass, tore through the noise. Lies. Vicious lies from a nobody. She's trying to extort us. A desperate gutter girl clawing for attention. But her shrieks only fueled the storm. The guests did not look at her. They looked at Edward. Edward sat slumped in his chair, pale, hollow, staring at Clara as if he were staring through decades of choices and seeing only his failure. His lips moved but no words came. The titan of finance looked less like a king and more like a man dragged to the gallows. That silence was his confession, and everyone understood it. Damien's eyes darted wildly. His face flushed, his confidence shattered. He had mocked Clara only minutes ago. Now she stood on stage, not as a servant, but as a reckoning. His stomach churned with shame, though he tried to bury it under anger. "Father, say something. Tell them it isn't true." His plea cracked like brittle glass, thin and unconvincing. Isabella Moreau stared at her fiancé with tears in her hazel eyes. She saw Damien not as a victim, but as a reflection of everything his family represented: cruelty, arrogance, deceit. Her fingers closed around the massive diamond ring that weighed down her hand. Slowly, deliberately, she slid it off. The pale indentation left behind felt like freedom. She placed the ring on the table beside the wine stain, the stone glittering like a mockery of love. "This was never love," she said softly but firmly, her voice cutting through the room's chaos. "It was a transaction. A merger of names. And I refuse to be part of it." She turned her back on Damien and walked away, each step decisive, unshackled. The crowd parted for her as whispers rose like a tide. Victoria shrieked again, her fury now directed at her husband. "Edward, tell them. Deny it. Deny her. Save us." She clutched at his jacket, her nails scratching against the silk lapels. Her carefully maintained world was collapsing. She had built her power on his name. If his name crumbled, so would she. But Edward did not deny. His eyes remained locked on Clara. His jaw clenched. His face was gray and weary. The truth had broken free, and he no longer had the strength to cage it. From across the table, Mr. and Mrs. Lee, the Korean magnates whose company was set to merge with Harrington Global, exchanged a look. Mr. Lee stood slowly, his presence commanding more authority than Edward had ever wielded. His voice, cold and precise, sliced through the clamor. "In my world," he said, "business is built on trust and honor. A man who abandons his child cannot be trusted to honor any promise. Your foundation is sand, Edward Harrington. We cannot merge our legacy with dishonor." Gasps echoed again, but this time with finality. Investors understood instantly. The deal was dead. The crown jewel of Edward's career was gone, shattered in front of his peers. The Harrington name, once synonymous with wealth and fear, now dripped with scandal. Mr. Lee turned to the audience, his words deliberate. "Let this be a lesson. Character is the only currency that never loses value." Then he walked out with his wife, their departure dignified, devastating. The sound of their heels on marble was louder than Victoria's screams, louder than Damien's frantic mutters. It was the sound of billions walking away. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, microphones raised. Guests shouted, some jeering, some reveling in the downfall of the mighty. The symphony of chaos filled the ballroom, every note sharper than the last. But on the stage, Clara stood calm, her chest rising and falling with the remnants of her song. She had not just sung for her mother. She had torn down a dynasty. Edward Harrington finally rose, but he looked like a man carved out of stone, drained and broken. His voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper, but those closest heard it. Maria. One word. One name. A surrender, a confession, a lament. Victoria's scream split the air, raw and animalistic. Don't you dare. Don't you dare give her that. You built this. We built this. You will not let her destroy us. She shook him, but Edward did not fight back. His eyes remained fixed on Clara, the daughter he had abandoned, the truth he could no longer escape. The empire trembled. The Harrington name cracked. And the whole world was watching. The Elysium Club had become a battlefield. Not of swords and steel, but of words, whispers, and flashing cameras. The Harringtons, once untouchable, were unraveling before the city's elite. Every gasp, every photo, every whisper was another nail hammered into the coffin of their dynasty. Reporters surged forward like a wave, their lenses catching every expression. Edward stood at the center of the storm, his face hollow, his once steady hands trembling as if the song still echoed through his bones. He was no longer Edward Harrington the Titan. He was Rick, the man who had chosen ambition over love, and the world now knew it. Victoria fought like a cornered queen. Her voice shredded the air as she pointed at Clara. She's lying. She's a desperate thief, a manipulator. Look at her. Look at her uniform. You believe a waitress over a Harrington. Her words were meant to wound, to command, but no one looked at Clara with disdain anymore. They looked at her with awe. They looked at Victoria with disgust. Damien sat frozen, pale and clammy. The arrogance that had fueled his mockery earlier had drained out of him like spilled wine. He watched Isabella walk toward Clara, her head high, her gown flowing like freedom. The sight gutted him. His fiancée, his prize, his symbol of status, was abandoning him, drawn to the courage he could never muster. Isabella reached the stage. Her heels struck the floor like a drumbeat of resolve. She stood beside Clara, eyes glistening with tears but filled with strength. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling yet sure. Thank you for reminding me what dignity looks like. Clara's reply was soft, but it carried. You are saving yourself. The two women, one who had been born into wealth, the other who had clawed her way through hardship, stood together, united not by class but by truth. The sight sent murmurs rippling through the room. It was no longer just about Edward's sins. It was about defiance, about women refusing to be silenced by money or power. Victoria's fury twisted into desperation. Security. Remove her. Remove both of them. She pointed at Clara and Isabella with a trembling, jeweled hand. Her shrieks rang like cracks in porcelain. Two of the Harringtons' private guards began to move toward the stage, their suits tight across broad shoulders. The crowd parted, eager for more spectacle. The guards reached for Clara, but before they could touch her, another figure stepped forward. Mr. Davies, the weary manager of the Elysium, planted himself between the guards and the women. His thin frame carried the weight of unexpected courage. You will not lay a hand on her, he declared, his voice steady, resonant. For tonight, this stage belongs to decency, not to power. Miss Wells has resigned. She is no longer your servant. The guards hesitated. They had orders, but Mr. Davies' authority inside these walls held weight. His eyes burned with conviction, his stance immovable. The crowd erupted with cheers, some mocking, some supportive, all feeding the firestorm. Clara gripped the microphone one last time. Her voice, raw but unwavering, rang across the ballroom. You built an empire on silence and lies. But tonight, the truth was louder. The eruption was instantaneous. Applause thundered from the edges of the room, mixed with shouts and chaos. Reporters shouted questions, their flashes strobing across Edward's ashen face. Guests scrambled to align themselves on the winning side of history, abandoning the Harringtons with the swiftness of rats fleeing a sinking ship. Edward's knees buckled. He lowered himself into his chair, his face slack, his eyes distant. He no longer looked like a man. He looked like a ruin. Victoria shook him, her voice ragged. "Fight back, Edward. Deny it. Deny her." But Edward only whispered again, softer this time, almost to himself. "Maria." The sound was a blade through Victoria's heart. She recoiled, her face twisted with horror, because in that single word, she heard not just confession but betrayal. She was not his anchor. She was never his first choice. And everyone in the room knew it. Damien rose abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. His voice cracked as he shouted into the chaos. "This isn't true. She's nothing. She's nobody." But his words fell flat, drowned beneath the roaring storm. No one listened to him. He was the heir of a crumbling empire, powerless against the tide. Mr. Lee's earlier condemnation still hung in the air. Business was over. The Harrington fortune, once endless, was now bleeding out in real time. Their legacy had been burned, and the match was Clara's song. Clara turned to leave the stage, Isabella at her side, Mr. Davies guarding their steps. As they disappeared into the service corridor, the roar of the ballroom followed them. It was the sound of scandal, of history rewriting itself, of an empire falling before the eyes of the world. The Harrington dynasty had not been defeated by rivals or markets. It had been undone by the voice of the daughter Edward had abandoned. A voice that refused to remain silent any longer. The service corridor was stark and bright, the hum of the ventilation replacing the storm of voices behind them. Clara's hands trembled as the adrenaline ebbed. Isabella walked beside her, her gown brushing against the sterile tiles, her face flushed but alive with new resolve. Mr. Davies followed close, his shoulders sagging, yet his presence steady, as though shielding them from echoes of the chaos. They reached the side exit. A cool gust of night air met them, laced with the faint scent of rain on stone. The city outside did not know yet what had happened inside the Elysium. Its towers blinked indifferently, unaware that an empire had just cracked open in the ballroom above. Isabella stopped beneath a streetlight. The glow turned her eyes to molten gold. "I have nowhere to go," she said. Her voice was steady, but fear quivered beneath it. "My parents will be furious. They wanted this engagement more than I did. They wanted the Harrington name tied to ours." Clara did not hesitate. "You can stay with me. It's small, and it's nothing like your world, but it's safe. And it's honest." Her words carried no hesitation, only sincerity. In that moment, the waitress who had stood invisible all night became the anchor Isabella needed. Isabella exhaled a laugh that broke into a sob. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for walking into that storm." Clara reached out and took her hand. Their clasp was firm, forged in shared rebellion. Two women from opposite ends of society, bound together by the choice to step away from cages. Mr. Davies cleared his throat. "You should both lie low for a while. The press will swarm. Clara, your face is already burned into their cameras. By morning, the city will know your name." He said it not as a warning but as truth. A truth that promised both danger and possibility. Clara nodded. "Let them." She felt the weight of her mother's locket against her chest. For once, she was not afraid of being seen. She had sung, and the world had listened. The following days proved Mr. Davies right. The city was drenched in headlines. The song that shattered the Harringtons. Waitress with a secret voice exposes billionaire. Love child's lament cost CEO billions. Every channel replayed the shaky footage of Clara on stage, her voice rising, her gaze locked on Edward Harrington. Commentators debated her bravery, her lineage, and the collapse of the Harrington dynasty. Edward Harrington resigned within 48 hours. His empire's stock spiraled into ruin, investors scattering like startled birds. Victoria vanished into her estate, a prisoner of the walls she had gilded for herself. Damien disappeared entirely, his name now a curse whispered with contempt instead of envy. The Harringtons had been dethroned in full view of the city. Clara's life turned upside down as well. Paparazzi camped outside her apartment. Neighbors whispered. But for every camera pointed at her, there came a letter of gratitude, a call from producers, invitations from stages she had only dared to dream of. She was no longer invisible. She was a symbol. Isabella stayed by her side, no longer an ornament for a dynasty, but a woman choosing her own path. She became Clara's ally, her press shield, her confidant. In the storm, they had found each other. One evening, as Clara prepared tea in her tiny kitchen, her phone rang. The call was from a law office representing a wealthy philanthropist. A fund had been created in Maria Wells' name, enough to ensure her medical care at the finest facility in the country, forever. The benefactor had been moved by Clara's courage. Clara pressed the phone to her ear, her vision blurring with tears. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe without the weight of fear. Her mother would be cared for. Always. Weeks passed, and the noise began to settle. Yet one envelope arrived that silenced Clara's world all over again. Heavy cream-colored stationery. No return address. Inside, a handwritten letter, elegant but unsteady. Clara. There are no words strong enough to undo what I abandoned. I told myself that leaving Maria for ambition was strength. It was not. It was cowardice. She was the melody of my life, and I traded it for silence. You have given me that melody back, even if it is a song that condemns me. I cannot ask forgiveness. I have forfeited the right. But what remains of what I built has been placed in trust for you. Use it to build something true. Something I was never strong enough to give you. I will not trouble you or your mother again. Rick. Inside was not a check but a legal deed, transferring the remnants of the Harrington fortune into Clara's name. She held the letter in shaking hands. Tears blurred the ink. It was not reconciliation. It was not redemption. It was surrender. A final, broken note from the man who had been both father and stranger. Clara looked out her window at the sprawling city. Once, it had loomed like an adversary. Tonight, it looked like a promise. Clara stood at the window of her small apartment, the letter from Edward, Rick, as her mother had called him, still clutched in her hands. The city stretched before her, restless, glittering, indifferent. For years, she had looked at those towers as if they belonged to someone else, as if she could only serve beneath their shadows. Tonight, they seemed closer, almost within reach. The letter trembled in her grip. The words carved deep, as though they had been written with guilt instead of ink. A man who had walked away from love, from family, from her, was finally stripped of the name that had shielded him. He had confessed. He had given up what remained. Yet even now, Clara felt no triumph. What use was wealth when it arrived decades too late? What use was confession when her mother had lived half a life alone? Still, one truth rang louder than all else. Her mother's love had not been a dream. It had been real, alive, powerful enough to birth a song that could destroy an empire. Clara pressed her locket against her chest, whispering softly. He called you his willow, Mama. And tonight, the world knows it was true. The days that followed blurred into a whirlwind. Reporters crowded her door, shouting questions. Was she the rightful heir to the Harrington fortune? Would she take her father's place in the empire? Clara answered none of them. She had no interest in boardrooms or stock markets. She had stood on a stage, and her voice had done what billions could not. That was her inheritance. Isabella stood beside her, unwavering. She took calls, deflected paparazzi, and organized Clara's calendar with a precision born from years of high society training. But she was no longer the pliant woman groomed to marry into wealth. She was free, fierce, and Clara could see the fire in her eyes each time she faced down a camera lens. Together, they became a shield and a banner, Clara the voice, Isabella the resolve. Mr. Davies, too, remained a constant presence. Though weary and grey, his pride in Clara was plain. He had known Maria. He had seen her in the glow of youth, in the shadow of heartbreak, in the quiet dignity of survival. Watching Clara reclaim that buried truth was, for him, an act of justice decades in the making. He visited often, never lingering long, but always leaving with tears hidden behind tired smiles. Meanwhile, the Harrington family scattered like ash. Edward remained in silence, his resignation accepted, his empire stripped. Victoria, shunned from galas and charity boards, cloistered herself inside her estate, her shrieks now echoing only against cold marble walls. Damien vanished from the city entirely. Rumors swirled of exile, of debts, of a man unable to live beneath the weight of his family's disgrace. The world, however, did not let go of Clara. The video of her performance was played endlessly, a haunting anthem of defiance. Auditions poured in. Concert halls called. Producers begged. Some wanted her for her story, others for her voice. Clara ignored the vultures. She chose carefully, accepting only the offers that respected her as an artist, not as a headline. One evening, Isabella found her at the piano in the corner of their shared apartment. Clara's fingers pressed tentative chords, her voice humming fragments of new melodies. Isabella leaned in the doorway, watching her. "That night changed everything," she said softly. "But do you know what I think?" Clara looked up, waiting. Isabella smiled faintly. "I think it also gave you back your music." Clara's throat tightened. "Yes," she whispered. "It did." She sang again that night, not for an audience, not for the city, but for herself and for her mother. Her voice filled the small apartment, warm and unrestrained. It was not polished like it had been in the ballroom. It was raw, honest, alive. Isabella sat nearby, listening with her eyes closed, letting the music wrap around her like a promise. The letter from Edward lay on the table, the legal deed beside it. The wealth meant little compared to the truth Clara had claimed. Yet she knew she could use it. Not for diamonds, not for palaces, but for purpose. She would build something of her own, something Maria would have been proud of. Clara sang until her throat ached, until her heart felt lighter. She ended with a whisper to the empty air. "Mama, your story is mine now. And I will make sure the world never forgets it." Beyond the window, the city shimmered like a stage. And for the first time, Clara knew it was hers to claim. Weeks slipped into months, yet the echoes of that night at the Elysium Club never faded. Clara's song had not only dismantled the Harrington dynasty but also awakened something larger in the city itself. It became more than a scandal. It became a symbol. The footage of her standing alone under the chandeliers, her voice trembling with truth, circulated endlessly, inspiring strangers who had never set foot inside the world of wealth and privilege. Clara did not seek fame, yet it followed her like a relentless tide. Invitations from producers and concert halls multiplied. Headlines hailed her as the waitress who sang an empire to ruins, the voice that made the mighty fall. But Clara refused to be consumed by spectacle. She accepted only those opportunities that honored her story, her voice, and the dignity her mother had carried through every hardship. With Isabella by her side, the chaos became bearable. Isabella's sharp wit and steady resolve turned away opportunists and sheltered Clara from the worst of the frenzy. Together, they forged a partnership that surprised even them. What began as an unlikely alliance in a ballroom of cruelty grew into a bond of trust and strength. Isabella had left behind a life of gilded cages. Now, she chose freedom, and she chose to walk it with Clara. Mr. Davies remained a quiet presence, often visiting with updates about Maria. His eyes softened each time he spoke of the new care facility, where Maria Wells received the best treatment money could provide. The fund established in her name ensured she would live her remaining years with comfort and dignity. Clara visited often, sitting by her mother's side, singing softly, watching her mother's tired face light up with recognition. In those moments, all the pain of the past felt worth it. As for the Harringtons, their empire lay in ruins. Edward retreated from public life, his once commanding presence reduced to silence. He had left behind wealth, but more importantly, he had left behind a confession. Victoria, stripped of influence, wandered the empty halls of her estate, furious yet powerless. Damien, who had once smirked at Clara's uniform, vanished into obscurity. Their downfall was total, not because of rivals or markets, but because of truth revealed in a single song. Clara's path, however, stretched forward. One night, she stood backstage at a grand concert hall, the hum of an expectant audience vibrating through the floor. Her palms were damp, her heart racing. But when she stepped into the light, she was not the trembling waitress of Elysium. She was Clara Wells, a woman who had survived scorn, sung through humiliation, and claimed her story before the world. The piano began. Clara lifted her head, her voice spilling into the silence with the same haunting clarity as the night she first sang the Willow's Lament. This time, though, it was not a weapon against cruelty. It was a celebration. A testament to resilience, to dignity, to the power of truth. The audience rose in thunderous applause, but Clara's gaze sought only one face in the crowd. Isabella's eyes gleamed with pride, her hands clasped together, tears shimmering. In that gaze, Clara saw the future, not of wealth or dynasties, but of freedom, of music, of lives rebuilt on honesty rather than lies. When the final note faded, the applause thundered, echoing through the vast hall. Yet in Clara's heart, the true ovation came from a quiet place. From a memory of her mother's voice, whispering stories of a man named Rick, and a song about a willow that bends but never breaks. Clara bowed her head, her chest rising with steady breath. She had lost much, endured much, but gained everything that mattered. She had proved that a single voice, unafraid to speak truth, could bring down empires and build hope in its place. The lights dimmed. The curtain fell. And Clara Wells walked off the stage not as a servant, not as a secret, but as a woman whose voice had changed the world. Every empire built on lies will eventually crumble, but truth and dignity will always endure. Clara's story shows us that no matter how small or powerless we may feel, one voice spoken with courage can shatter arrogance and inspire others to rise. Wealth and status may command attention, but it is integrity, compassion, and honesty that command respect. This story is a work of fiction, written to feel vivid and real so that the lessons within it can be carried into our own lives. Thank you for watching and supporting our storytelling journey. If this story touched you, please share your thoughts in the comments, give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience, truth, and courage.